But yeah, no, I mean, like I was saying, it would be super ironic if it came out right now that I was against polyamorous relationships after you just after I've known you for like at least over the past 2 months, and I've had you as like the administrator for my Discord. Like that would be hashtag awkward to say the least.
And it's not like I've been hiding the fact that I'm poly from you.
Well, yeah, considering at least like two of your partners are also in my Discord, who are my like close friends of mine. Yeah, and I mean like
Also,
obviously.
one of them is your other admin.
Oh yeah, that's right. Lol. It's great. It's like a bunch of fucking gay people running my Discord. The gays are taking over.
The gays destroying the family.
Oh yeah. No, I love it. I love the memes where it's like oh, it's people talking about you know, the dangerous transes that the conservatives warned you about? That's me, motherfucker.
You. It's literally only you. The rest of us just want cuddles.
Oh wow. Listen, I'm not trying to do anything dangerous, alright? I mean, actually, like, literally, I'm only trying to, like, you know, instill, like, basic healthcare, like, human rights, and, like, basic workman rights, and, like, basic rights for trans people, and, like, a bunch of really basic shit. It's still always weird to me that conservatives manage to spin that as, like, somehow some weird kind of attack on, like, the basic nature of the family, or some bullshit.
But Riley, healthcare for everybody is too radical. You need to tone it back.
It also would cost too much, ignore the fact that we just gave, like, we spent, like, $2.5 billion on the stock market and corporations.
Oh my fucking god, I know.
Ignore that, ignore that.
That's a great, that is easily the greatest thing that, or not like the greatest thing, like, the most, I say impressive, but not in, like, a way that expresses any approval. But, like, that is the most impressive feat that conservatives have ever accomplished, is that convincing poor people that it's in their best interest to give most of the money that the government has for dealing with this crisis to the people who have almost all of it in America. That still boggles my mind to end. And also, I do want to address something that Alan commented. I actually hate how some people are trying to erase poly from the gay community. Is this true? Is there, like, poly erasure happening? Like, this is news to me. I mean, like, I know that
I am also not the person to ask because
what are you talking about? Don't you know, as the token poly person, then you have to know everything there is about the poly community?
Oh fuck, my bad.
You're an inside person.
Yeah. Just like how well, I mean, actually, I guess that there's no token trans person here because we're all trans. Hey, what's up, girls? How's it going? But yeah, no, as the token poly person, obviously you have an immediate implied obligation to know everything that there is about the poly community and poly discourse. And if you don't, then you're a fake poly person and you don't deserve your title. I hope you can hear the levels of irony here. I hope that's coming across.
I can hear you getting crushed under the weight of it.
Okay. I'm just pointing that out. Just making sure everything is good. I can be extremely ironic sometimes, people. I just want people to be aware of my humor. Just so we're all good. Wow, Riley, what a degenerate person you are. I mean, believing everyone deserves basic human rights, super degenerate. I fucking know. No, listen, according to some people, that's, like, unironically true. Which is, I mean, like, I understand the psychology, like, I read a lot about political psychology, so, like, I get it, but, and it's kind of, I won't say it's sad, because, like, a lot of it is that there are certain unhealthy mindsets, well, certain mindsets that are healthy for, like, certain stages of human psychological development, but which become unhealthy under certain conditions, and when people start expressing these sorts of ideas, it's definitely, like, a much unhealthier manifestation of what otherwise could possibly be, like, healthier ideas, right? Like, when people want to have a focus on the state, if the idea is, hey, we should have a state so that we can actually have, like, some basic maintenance of, like, what a society is or could be, then like, yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. But when you start having a state that adopts certain morals which are oppressive to people, especially people of minority status or people of different like classes, or which introduces classes entirely, and implies the oppression by those classes, yeah, then that mentality starts not being the greatest. But like having a society at all, yeah, that's kind of cool. We should work from there. I hope that makes sense. I'm kind of spinning some Maslow's hierarchy of needs, spiral dynamics ideas on y'all.
What you're saying is we live in a society.
Yes, but not in the way that people who role play as like very edgy
The
Joker
Joker.
want to be. Yeah, not as like Joker playboys fucking try to make it out to be. We live in a society, yes. Unfortunately, I don't even know what that, like, I used to know what that means. I really don't know what that means anymore because we have so many different understandings of what it means when people say that. Good
Honestly,
mythical,
At this point, I
right?
thought it was just a racist dog whistle. Just devolved that far down the.
I thought it was
fucking
too. Like, I thought it used to be like, we live in a society, like, basically expressing that, oh, you know, there are certain people in society, like, certain things which could only happen in, like, which could only be justified in the society that we live in. And that could be generally applied for people from any political background. Like, I thought that's originally what it was. And now we've moved to the point where it's just like, we live in a society. Oh, you mean racism, and not in a good way. Like, not like you're opposing racism, like, oh, you're actually, like, subtly dog-whistling racism. Like, not great. But what'll you do?
You do dailies in ESO. That's what you do.
No, I disagree. They're not healthy psychologies. The problem is the lens through which the analysis is happening. Well, so, I mean, like, I agree with that. I feel like those are two different ways of saying the same thing, right? Like, whether or not you're thinking of, like, the lens through which you view a psychology and, like, whether or not that psychology is manifested in a healthy or unhealthy way. Like, it's basically saying the same thing, right? Like, if you have the core principle, like, the core principles can be useful to a society, but, like, under certain conditions and through certain, I guess, as you would say, lenses, they manifest in negative ways. Right, so I feel like either way that you say it, it gets you to the same place. Yeah. So I'm reading someone's response, so I'm going to read this out and I'm going to respond to it. Sort of, but not. The distinction is motivation to psychology. Authoritarians can appear to have the same political psychology as hard leftists, but they're radically different. So no, I mean, like, I completely agree with that. So if we're going according to, like, a spiral dynamics model, the authoritarian is going to be, like, very stage blue, which is a high focus on state and unity and the collective above the self, right? Like, you know, a great example of that is like a lot of like Southern conservatives in the United States who are like God and country and who wear the American flag fucking everywhere, like Blair White, right? Or at least the audience that Blair White appeals to. It's hard to say if Blair White is actually like really stage blue according to that model, or just like appealing to that to the people who are at that sort of stage of psychological development for money, because that's probably also the case, but she could also share a good degree of those beliefs genuinely. But what was I gonna say? Yeah, so a lot of those people are going to be coming from a more stage blue / stage orange mentality, whereas a lot of leftists are going to be coming from a more stage green mentality, which focuses a lot on like a renowned focus, or not renowned focus, a newly found, speaking relatively over the course of history, focus on individual liberties and expression of the self and finding meaning in life through relationships to one another, right? And so, yeah, they do come from fundamentally different psychologies. I suppose that when I'm also trying to remember where we're coming from in the first place. The thing is that, like, at each of these different stages of the model, there can be positive and negative aspects of it, right? So not everyone who comes from sort of a stage blue mentality is going to automatically be an authoritarian, right? Like, there are healthy aspects to get from there, like the idea of being able to work in collectives at all, right? Because that's sort of where that comes from according to that psychological model. Like, that's sort of where we start developing the idea of working in collectives, right? And like that's important because like you said, like people who are leftists do adopt some of those things, and that's why people can make them out to be similar, even though like they do fundamentally operate from a different place. But like when we were talking about fascism, that's like sort of the extreme of a Sage Blue mentality. That's like, oh yeah, we're so invested in the state that we're going to literally have it be like the entire society revolves around the state. Like that's the only reason to live, is the state is all. The state is the high, like the way, the truth, and the life, right? And that's obviously like once we get to that sort of a point, it's we have gotten into a very unhealthy place, and we see that, and that's pretty easy to recognize. But that doesn't mean that there aren't like the baseline mechanisms of that mentality are not at least partially useful. Like there are good things to take from it, obviously not like fascism, but like the fundamental ideas of collective unity more so, right? Because yeah, like people who are on the left are totally like collective unity, or at least we like to say that we are. We're still working on that to the degree that there's a lot of fractured efforts on the left, and we could probably take a page from that. But you know, because we focus a lot on like individuality, it's very hard to. Someone could easily make the argument that that's a big reason why conservatives are able to unite more, even though they are ideologically different, is because they are operating largely from the same fundamental base. Where there's a focus on the collective above the individual, right? And because of that, they always have an easier time collecting under like someone they might even disagree with on most things if they fundamentally share the same beliefs that they do. Let me see. The fundamental value is different. Collective unity as cooperation versus collective unity as tribalism. Individualism as autonomy versus individualism as atomization. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It's just like a different manifestation of the idea of collective unity, right? Like, so the model that we're talking about right now looks at the development of psychological development, both on an individual level, but also over like the entire course of human history, right? Yes, tribalism is like the first form of collective unity that sort of developed, but that's very different than when you're talking about collective unity in the form of like the first types of civilization, right? Like we're talking about very different forms of collective unity, right? When we're talking about like movements that can actually affect the larger happenings of an entire civilization, right? Like it's very different in form, right? And when you first see collective unity in that kind of scale, that's when you start seeing the birth of like Sage Blue civilizations, right? So that's like the Catholic Church, or like Roman, or like the Roman civilization, or like a lot of very early civilizations, especially those which revolved heavily around religion, historically speaking anyway. Like a lot of them were very Sage Blue, and it's weird because you can draw a lot of parallels between those societies and societies today, right? But yeah, that's sort of the first time that we see in history like collective unity on such a scale that it could actually affect the political landscape of an entire nation, or indeed the world, right? And that's sort of what the model is saying, right? Like people who are conservative sort of have some degree of advantage with that, because like that's the mindset that sort of perfected it. You could say that they have like, I don't know, like video game terms, they have like a racial passive to it, or a racial passive advantage. No implications of race there, just for like analogy to like a video game context, right? Whereas like for people who are leftists, like we still have, like we can rely on those principles of collective unity as means of implementing systematic change, but like it's harder for us because it's not something, because we're trying to do a lot more. Like it's easy to have collective change when you just have a fundamental value of the collective above the self. Like it's really easy to do, and you don't have to think a lot about it, which is why a lot of conservatives don't exactly have the most thought through ideas and perspectives, right? Not dunking on them or speaking any shade, that's just like practically how it is. Whereas a lot Whereas, you know, when you're a leftist, you have to have a lot more thought put into your perspectives, right? Because, yes, collective unity is important, but we also want to make sure that we don't jeopardize that by losing the value of individual expression, right? And so we have to do a lot more. It requires a lot more nuanced thinking, which conservatives or people of lesser stages of psychological development, however you want to put it, they have to. It would require a lot more thinking that is just not as comfortable for them. And so they'd rather, you know, just think like, oh, well, you know, I should just focus on the collective above the self and just like leave that to dictate most of my beliefs, right? It's an evolution in nuanced thinking once you start looking at collective movements through more liberal ideas, right? Because like it is sort of like a novel idea of thinking about like the expression, like collective unified movements as a way to express individual liberties and characteristics, right? Like it can seem sort of contradictory, and people who are conservative like to play on this, I think, pretty often. Where am I going now? I'm gonna go to Somerset. I mean, like that's sort of when conservatives always make the joke that like, oh yeah, they like liberals always talk about how everyone is a special little snowflake, right? Like that's where the snowflake liberal idea came from, right? And you know, conservatives will poke fun at this nuanced thought that people who are more left will try to engage in because they see it as futile, right? Like they see it as inherently contradictory, and it takes like a lot more thought and personal development to be able to see that it's not novel and it's actually like a very important step in national politics. So that's just, yeah, my 2 cents on that. Again, like I'm not sure if we're necessarily disagreeing on that. Like it sounds like it might just be a difference of vocabulary on that front. God, I just talked for so long. You ever know when you talk for like so long at like such a fast pace that eventually you stop and you're just like, whoa, I'm sort of dizzy.